The cold steel of the observation deck railing bit into Commander Eliza Chen's palms as she watched the carrier fleet shrink against the vast Pacific horizon. Her lieutenant's insignia felt heavy on her collar, a demotion that still stung 3 months after the disciplinary hearing. The sound of her boots against the deck plating had become the rhythm of her exile, measured, contained, and stripped of purpose. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Still watching the ships you're not allowed to command? The voice belonged to Captain James Harlow, her former superior and the architect of her current predicament. His weathered face showed neither malice nor sympathy as he approached. "Observing fleet movements is part of my current duties, sir," Eliza replied, her voice carefully neutral despite the anger churning beneath. Her new position in strategic assessment meant she watched rather than led, analyzed rather than decided, punishment for questioning a direct order during the Ryukyu Strait incident. The Maritime Control Center hummed with activity around them. Officers moved with practiced efficiency, coordinating the movements of the Pacific Fleet's most valuable assets. Naval intelligence had reported increased submarine activity in the region, and the carrier group was executing standard evasive protocols. Harlow studied the tactical display, where blue markers represented friendly vessels in precise formation. "The Admiralty expects the situation report by 1,800 hours. I trust you've completed your analysis." "Yes, sir. My assessment indicates the submarine positioning suggests a testing of our response patterns rather than immediate hostile intent." Eliza handed him the tablet containing her report, a meticulously detailed analysis that would likely be skimmed and forgotten. "Always analyzing beyond your directive," Harlow muttered, not bothering to look at her work. "That's what got you here, Lieutenant." The rebuke hung in the air between them. 3 months ago, Eliza had been Commander Chen, tactical officer aboard the USS Defender, rising star in the Pacific Fleet. That was before she'd countermanded Captain Harlow's order during a joint exercise, breaking chain of command to prevent what she believed was an imminent collision with a civilian fishing vessel. "Sometimes analysis reveals what doctrine obscures, sir," she replied, the words escaping before she could stop them. Harlow's eyes narrowed. "Your job isn't to question orders, Lieutenant, it's to execute them. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you might earn back your commander's stripes." As he walked away, Eliza returned her gaze to the distant horizon. The carrier group was now just a collection of dark specks against the endless blue. Her fingertips brushed against the small notebook in her pocket, her personal log of anomalies and patterns she'd observed in submarine movements over the past 6 months. Patterns that worried her. Patterns that no one wanted to hear about. "Still playing the lone wolf, Chen?" Lieutenant Commander Derek Wallace appeared beside her, his casual stance belying the sharp intelligence that had made him one of naval intelligence's most valuable analysts. "You know, staring at the ocean won't change Harlow's mind." "I'm not trying to change his mind," Eliza replied. "I'm tracking submarine deployment patterns that don't match historical precedent." Wallace raised an eyebrow. "Official analysis says they're running standard drills." "Official analysis is wrong." Eliza pulled out her notebook and flipped to a page covered with handwritten coordinates and timestamps. "Look at these positioning reports from the last 4 months. They're establishing a search grid, not conducting drills." Wallace studied her notes with professional curiosity. Unlike most of her colleagues, he didn't immediately dismiss her theories. "Interesting theory, but what would they be searching for?" "That's what worries me." Eliza turned to a new page showing depth readings and current patterns. "Whatever it is, it's approximately 300 meters down in the Ryukyu Strait section." "Chen," Wallace's voice dropped to a near whisper, "you need to let this go. Your career can't take another hit." "My career isn't what matters here. If I'm right, if you're right, no one will believe you anyway. Not after Ryukyu." Wallace's expression softened slightly. "Look, I respect your instincts, always have, but pushing this will only bury you deeper." The warning was well-intentioned, but Eliza had heard it too many times before. From colleagues, from friends, even from her former mentor Admiral Takashi, who had managed to save her from a dishonorable discharge but couldn't prevent the demotion and reassignment. The memory of that day still burned. Standing at attention before the disciplinary board, the evidence of her insubordination playing on screens around her, her voice clear on the command recordings, overriding Captain Harlow's orders without authorization. The fishing vessel had been there, exactly where she'd calculated it would be, invisible to standard radar due to a storm front but clearly present on the thermal imaging she'd insisted on checking. She had been right. The Defender would have collided with the vessel, potentially killing the civilian crew and causing an international incident. But being right didn't matter in the Navy's hierarchy. What mattered was that she had broken chain of command, questioned a superior officer's judgment in front of the crew, and set what the Admiralty called a dangerous precedent for command structure integrity. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I appreciate the concern, Eliza told Wallace, closing her notebook. But some things are worth the risk. Wallace shook his head. Just be careful who you share those theories with. Not everyone is as open-minded as I am. As he walked away, Eliza felt the familiar weight of isolation settle over her. Once, she had been part of something. A respected officer with a promising future. Now she was the cautionary tale. The officer who thought she knew better than her superiors and paid the price. The rest of her shift passed in the quiet monotony that had become her daily routine. Analyzing deployment patterns, documenting fleet movements, writing reports that disappeared into the bureaucratic void. The work wasn't challenging, but it gave her access to the data she needed to continue her private investigation. At 1,900 hours, Eliza left the control center and made her way to the officers' mess. The large room was half empty, the evening meal already finished for most of the base personnel. She selected a tray and found a corner table, away from the scattered groups of officers engaged in casual conversation. "Mind if I join you?" The voice belonged to Lieutenant Sophia Reyes, one of the few people on base who still treated Eliza as a colleague rather than a pariah. "Please!" Eliza gestured to the empty chair across from her. Reyes sat down with her tray. "You missed the excitement earlier." Admiral Kimura made a surprise inspection. Had Harlow sweating through his uniform. "I was completing the strategic assessment report." "Of course you were." Reyes took a bite of her meal. "You know, most people would take the hint after a demotion. Keep their head down, play the game, get back in the good graces of command." "Most people haven't seen what I've seen." Reyes leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Chen, I've always respected your skills. That's why I'm telling you this as a friend. Whatever you think you've discovered, let it go. There are rumors that Harlow is looking for a reason to have you transferred to a land base in the middle of nowhere. He can't transfer me without cause. He's a captain with friends in the Admiralty. You're a demoted lieutenant with a record of insubordination. Who do you think wins that contest?" The truth in Reyes' words stung, but Eliza had long ago accepted the reality of her situation. "Some things are more important than my career." "Like what?" "What could possibly be worth throwing away everything you've worked for?" Eliza considered her friend's question. How could she explain the nagging certainty that had been growing in her mind for months? The conviction that the submarine movements she'd been tracking were part of something bigger, something potentially catastrophic. "Remember the Beijing Accord of 2022? She asked. Reyes nodded. "The Undersea Weapons Limitation Treaty. What about it? What if someone was looking for something that was supposed to be destroyed under that accord?" "That's a serious accusation, Chen. The kind that needs serious evidence." "I know." Eliza pushed her food around her plate. "That's what I've been working on." Before Reyes could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. Commander Victor Shaw, tactical officer aboard the flagship USS Lincoln, was entering with a group of junior officers trailing behind him like eager puppies. Shaw had been Eliza's rival at the academy, always second to her in tactical simulations but first in playing politics. His gaze found her across the room, and a smirk crossed his face. He said something to his entourage that caused them to laugh while looking in her direction. "Ignore him," Reyes advised. "He's not worth it." But Shaw was already making his way toward their table, his posture radiating smug confidence. "Well, if it isn't Lieutenant Chen. Still analyzing data nobody cares about?" Eliza met his gaze calmly. "Commander Shaw, I see you're still confusing leadership with popularity." His smile tightened. "At least I still have my command position. How's the view from the Strategic Assessment Department?" Must be nice and quiet, with all that time to think about how you threw away your career. I'd rather lose my rank than lose a ship, Eliza replied evenly. Shaw leaned down, placing his hands on the table. You know what your problem is, Chen? You think you're smarter than everyone else. That your precious analysis trumps experience and chain of command. But the Navy runs on orders, not theories. The Navy runs on protecting lives and completing the mission, Eliza corrected. Sometimes that requires thinking beyond orders. Shaw straightened, his expression hardening. And that right there is why you'll never command again. The Admiralty doesn't want freethinkers. They want officers who follow protocol. Is that what you tell yourself to justify blindly following orders you know are wrong? The mess hall had grown quiet, other officers watching the confrontation with poorly disguised interest. Shaw's face flushed with anger. You're pathetic, Chen. Clinging to your self-righteousness while your career circles the drain. Everyone knows you're finished in the Navy. Reyes stood up. That's enough, Commander. You've made your point. Shaw glanced at Reyes, then back at Eliza. You know what they call her behind her back? Career suicide, Chen. The officer too smart for her own good. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Chen? The fleet deployment you've been so obsessively tracking. We're running silent drills tomorrow. Proper chain of command, proper protocols. The way the Navy is supposed to work. After he left, the mess hall gradually returned to its normal volume. Reyes sat back down, concern etched on her face. You okay? I'm fine. Eliza's voice was steady, but her hands had clenched into fists beneath the table. Shaw always was threatened by anyone who outperformed him. He's tactical officer on the Lincoln now. Whatever you think of him personally, he has the Admiralty's ear. Eliza nodded, processing this information. The Lincoln was leading tomorrow's deployment, which meant Shaw would be overseeing the tactical operations, including response patterns to submarine contact. I need to get back to the control center, she said suddenly, standing up. Chen, what are you thinking? Reyes looked alarmed. Whatever it is, don't. You're already on thin ice. I just need to check something in the deployment orders. Eliza gathered her tray. Nothing inappropriate. Reyes didn't look convinced, but she didn't try to stop her. Just remember what I said. Some battles aren't worth fighting. Back in the control center, the night shift was settling in. Lieutenant Commander Wallace was still there, reviewing intelligence reports at his station. He looked up as Eliza approached. Thought you were off duty, he remarked. I need to check something in tomorrow's deployment parameters. Eliza kept her voice casual. Mind if I use your terminal? Mine's logged out for maintenance. Wallace hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. I'm going for coffee. Once he was gone, Eliza quickly accessed the tactical deployment plans for the following day. The carrier group would be conducting anti-submarine warfare drills in the exact area where she'd identified the unusual submarine activity. That couldn't be coincidence. She dug deeper, examining the patrol patterns and response protocols. The standard formation would place the destroyers in a screening position, with the Lincoln at the center of the formation. But with the submarine activity she'd been tracking, that formation would be vulnerable to finding anything interesting, Lieutenant? Eliza turned to find Captain Harlow standing behind her, arms crossed. She hadn't heard him approach. Sir, I was reviewing tomorrow's deployment patterns to complete my analysis. Your analysis was due at 1,800 hours, and that's not your terminal. Lieutenant Commander Wallace gave me permission while my station is under maintenance. Harlow's expression hardened. You were specifically instructed not to access tactical deployment plans without direct authorization from me. Sir, with respect, my strategic assessment role requires understanding of tactical deployments. Your role is whatever I say it is, Lieutenant. Harlow's voice was cold. You seem determined to repeat the same mistakes that cost you your rank. Consider yourself on restricted duty for the next 2 weeks. You'll report to Lieutenant Rodriguez for administrative tasks only. Captain, please, if you'll just look at the submarine tracking data I've compiled. That's enough, Chen. Harlow cut her off. Your obsession with finding problems where none exist is precisely why you're in this position. Report to Rodriguez at 0700 tomorrow. Dismissed. Eliza stood at attention, her mind racing. Yes, sir. As she left the control center, her thoughts were in turmoil. Restricted duty meant no access to the tactical systems, no way to monitor the fleet deployment, no chance to warn anyone if her suspicions proved correct. In her quarters, Eliza spread her notebooks across her desk. Months of careful observation, pattern analysis, and correlation. The submarine movements formed a clear search pattern centered on a specific area of the Ryukyu Strait. An area where, according to her research into classified archives she technically shouldn't have accessed, an experimental weapon system had been scuttled following the Beijing Accord. The system had been designed to disrupt sonar and radar, rendering ships essentially blind in combat conditions. If someone had located the wreckage and was attempting to salvage the technology, a knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, she found Admiral Takashi standing in the hallway. The older man's presence was unexpected. As Pacific Fleet Deputy Commander, he rarely visited the junior officers' quarters. "Admiral," she said, coming to attention, "this is unexpected." "At ease, Lieutenant." Takashi stepped inside when she moved aside. His eyes fell on the notebook spread across her desk. "Still the same, Eliza Chen. Always working, always analyzing." "Old habits, sir." Takashi picked up one of the notebooks, glancing at the coordinates and timestamps meticulously recorded in Eliza's precise handwriting. "I received a call from Captain Harlow. He's recommending your transfer to the Logistics Command in San Diego." Eliza felt her heart sink. "I see. He believes you're disruptive to command structure and unwilling to adapt to your current role." Takashi set the notebook down. "Are you? Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Always. I believe the submarine activity in the Ryukyu Strait represents a clear and present danger to our fleet. The pattern suggests a salvage operation targeting classified technology that was supposed to be destroyed under the Beijing Accord." Takashi's expression remained neutral. "That's a significant claim." "I have the data to support it," Eliza gestured to her notebooks. "The submarines are establishing a search grid centered on coordinates that match the recorded disposal site of Project Blackout." At the mention of the classified project name, Takashi's eyes sharpened. "How do you know about Blackout?" "I accessed the archives during my tactical officer training. The project was listed as decommissioned and disposed of in accordance with the Accord. That information is classified above your current clearance level. It was within my clearance when I accessed it, sir." Takashi was silent for a moment, studying her. "You know why I fought to keep you in the service, despite the disciplinary board's recommendation?" "No, sir." "Because the Navy needs officers who think beyond the immediate order, who see patterns others miss." He sighed. "But we also need officers who understand the necessity of command structure. Your actions during the Ryukyu incident, while ultimately preventing a collision, undermined Captain Harlow's authority in front of his crew. I made the call I thought was necessary to protect lives. And that's both your greatest strength and your greatest weakness." Takashi moved to the window, looking out at the nighttime base. "Harlow wants you gone because you make him uncomfortable. You represent a challenge to his leadership style. Is that why you're here, sir, to tell me I'm being transferred?" Takashi turned back to her. "I'm here to give you a choice. Accept the transfer to San Diego. Step away from this submarine theory of yours, and rebuild your career away from Harlow's influence. Or what, sir? Or convince me right now that your concerns about tomorrow's deployment are valid enough for me to risk my own standing by intervening." Eliza felt a surge of hope. She quickly gathered her notebooks and laid out the evidence. The submarine movement patterns, the historical disposal records of Project Blackout, the vulnerability in tomorrow's planned formation if the submarines had indeed recovered the sonar-disrupting technology. "The timing can't be coincidence," she concluded. "They've been searching for months, and now they're positioning assets exactly where our carrier group will be conducting drills tomorrow." Takashi studied the evidence in silence. Finally, he looked up. "Your analysis is compelling, but still circumstantial. I can't override tomorrow's deployment orders based on this." Eliza's hope deflated. "So I'm being transferred." "I didn't say that." Takashi handed back her notebooks. Report to my office at 0500 tomorrow. I'm assigning you as my personal tactical advisor for the day. You'll have access to real-time fleet data during the deployment." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet." His expression was grave. "If your theory proves incorrect, I won't be able to protect you from the consequences. Harlow will have his transfer, and I'll likely face questions about my judgment." "I understand the stakes, sir. I hope you do." Takashi moved toward the door. "Get some rest, Lieutenant. Tomorrow will either vindicate you or end your naval career." After the Admiral left, Eliza returned to her desk, reviewing her notes one final time. The pattern was clear to her. The submarine activity, the classified technology, the vulnerability of tomorrow's formation. But would it be clear enough when the moment came? Would she have the courage to speak up again, knowing what it had cost her last time? She thought of her father, a career naval officer who had taught her that courage sometimes meant standing alone when standing was hard. "The ocean doesn't care about your rank," he used to tell her. "It only cares if you respect its power and understand its patterns." Eliza closed her notebooks and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would test everything she believed about herself and her duty. As she drifted toward sleep, her mind was still working, still analyzing, still seeing patterns in the darkness that others seemed determined to ignore. The night passed too quickly, and at 0430, Eliza was already awake, showered, and in her freshly pressed uniform. She gathered her notebooks and the small tablet containing her digital files and made her way through the quiet pre-dawn base to Admiral Takashi's office. The Admiral was already there, reviewing reports with his aide. He nodded as Eliza entered. "Lieutenant Chen, good, will be monitoring the deployment from the Tactical Operations Center. The fleet begins movement at 0600. "Yes, sir." Eliza followed him down the corridor, aware of the curious glances from other officers they passed. Her presence at the Admiral's side would certainly fuel base gossip, especially given her recent restricted duty status. The Tactical Operations Center was a hive of controlled activity when they arrived. Large displays showed the carrier group's current position and the planned movement for the day's exercises. Officers and analysts moved between stations, confirming readings and updating systems. Captain Harlow was there, deep in conversation with the center's commanding officer. He looked up as Takashi and Eliza entered, his expression shifting from professional to confused to angry in the span of seconds. "Admiral," he acknowledged, approaching them. "I wasn't aware Lieutenant Chen would be joining us today." "The lieutenant is here at my request," Takashi replied smoothly. "I've temporarily assigned her as a tactical advisor for this deployment." Harlow's jaw tightened. "Sir, with respect, Lieutenant Chen is currently on restricted duty pending. I'm aware of her status, Captain. My authority supersedes your disciplinary action in this matter." Takashi's tone was polite but firm. "Unless you wish to question my judgment?" "No, sir." Harlow shot Eliza a look that promised consequences later. "May I ask what specific input the lieutenant is expected to provide?" "A fresh perspective," Takashi said simply. "Sometimes we become too accustomed to standard procedures to see alternatives." Before Harlow could respond, an officer called out from a monitoring station. "Fleet movement commencing. USS Lincoln is underway." On the main display, the icons representing the carrier group began to move, transitioning from their docked positions to the planned formation for the day's exercises. Eliza watched intently, comparing the actual movement to the deployment plan she'd studied the night before. "Standard Bravo formation," the tactical officer announced, "destroyers taking screening positions at designated coordinates." Eliza opened her notebook, checking the submarine positioning she'd tracked over the previous days. If her calculations were correct, at least 3 submarines would be operating in the area where the fleet was heading. "Sir?" she said quietly to Takashi. "Request permission to access the sonar tracking station." The Admiral nodded, and Eliza moved to the station manned by a young petty officer. "May I?" she asked, indicating the controls. The petty officer looked to Takashi, who nodded again. "Let the lieutenant access the system, Petty Officer Jackson." "Yes, sir." Jackson moved aside, allowing Eliza to adjust the sonar parameters. She modified the settings, expanding the range and adjusting the frequency filters based on the patterns she'd observed in the submarine movements. Almost immediately, the display changed, showing faint contacts that had been filtered out by the standard settings. "What are you doing to my sonar system?" demanded the center's technical chief, moving toward her station. "Expanding the detection parameters to account for potential countermeasures," Eliza explained, not looking up from her work. "Based on recent submarine activity patterns, standard settings might miss." "Lieutenant Chen is operating under my direct authority," Takashi interrupted. "Continue, Lieutenant." Eliza refined the settings further, and the faint contacts became more distinct. 3 submarine contacts, sir. Bearing 045, 103, and 178, approximately 15 nautical miles from the fleet's planned exercise position. Harlow moved to the station, studying the readings with skeptical eyes. "Those are ghost returns. Probably thermal layers or wildlife." "With respect, sir, they're moving in a coordinated pattern consistent with a triangulation formation." Eliza pointed to the movement tracks she'd captured. "Standard sonar wouldn't detect them because they're operating at the specific frequency range that Project Blackout was designed to disrupt." "Project what?" Harlow looked confused, then suspicious. "That's classified information, Lieutenant. Where did you—" "Admiral," Eliza cut in, addressing Takashi directly. "The fleet formation is vulnerable. If these submarines deploy whatever technology they've salvaged from the Blackout wreckage, our ships will lose sonar and radar capability simultaneously." Takashi studied the display, his expression grave. "Captain Harlow, what's your assessment?" Harlow hesitated, clearly torn between dismissing Eliza's theory and risking the Admiral's disapproval if she proved correct. "The contacts are irregular, sir. Standard protocol would classify them as environmentals, not hostile submarines. And if Lieutenant Chen is right, the probability is extremely low, sir. Changing the fleet deployment based on these readings would disrupt the planned exercises and potentially create unnecessary alarm." Eliza felt frustration building. The evidence was right in front of them, but Harlow was still refusing to see it. "Sir, request permission to contact the Lincoln directly." "Denied," Harlow said immediately. "Chain of command dictates that tactical adjustments come through this center, not from individual officers." Takashi was silent for a moment, weighing the situation. Around them, the operations center continued its normal function, officers monitoring the fleet's movement into the exercise area. "Lincoln reports entering exercise zone," called out the communications officer. "Commencing anti-submarine warfare drills in 5 minutes." Eliza felt a surge of urgency. "Admiral, if those submarines deploy the Blackout technology when our fleet is in standard formation—" "You've made your point, Lieutenant," Takashi said. He turned to the communication station. "Contact the Lincoln. Advise them to modify formation to Delta 7 and increase submarine surveillance." Harlow stepped forward. "Admiral, Delta 7 is a defensive formation. It would invalidate the planned exercises." "Better invalid exercises than vulnerable ships," Takashi replied. "Make the call." The communications officer nodded and began transmitting the order. On the main display, the fleet icons continued moving into their standard formation, unaware of the potential threat or the changed orders that were now being transmitted. "Lincoln acknowledges receipt," the communications officer reported. "Commander Shaw requests clarification on the reason for formation change." Eliza tensed. Shaw would resist the change, especially if he knew it originated from her concerns. "Inform Commander Shaw that the order comes directly from me," Takashi said. "Reason: potential submarine activity outside expected parameters." As they waited for the fleet to acknowledge and execute the new formation, Eliza kept her eyes on the submarine contacts. They were moving again, adjusting their positions in what appeared to be a response to the fleet's presence. "Sir, submarine contacts are accelerating," she reported. "They're converging on the fleet's position faster than expected." Takashi moved to her station, studying the readings himself. "Time to intercept?" "At current speed, less than 10 minutes, Eliza calculated, before the fleet can complete the formation change." The Admiral straightened. "Captain Harlow, elevate threat condition to Bravo. Authorize the Lincoln to deploy countermeasures." Harlow hesitated, only briefly before complying. "Yes, sir." Elevating to condition Bravo. The atmosphere in the operations center shifted immediately, officers moving with increased urgency as the threat level changed. The communications officer transmitted the new orders to the fleet, and on the main display, the ship icons began to adjust their positions more rapidly. "Lincoln acknowledges condition Bravo," the communications officer reported. deploying countermeasures and accelerating formation change. Eliza watched the submarine contacts, tracking their movement and speed. Something didn't feel right. The acceleration was too sudden, too coordinated. "Sir, I believe they're preparing to activate the blackout technology. The movement pattern matches testing protocols for wide-area electronic disruption." "How can you possibly know that?" Harlow demanded. "Because I studied the original blackout deployment scenarios during my tactical training," Eliza replied, not taking her eyes off the display. "This is exactly how the system was designed to be positioned before activation." Takashi made a quick decision. "Elevate to Condition Alpha. Order the fleet to deploy full electronic countermeasures and prepare for potential communications blackout." As Harlow relayed the orders, a new alert sounded from the sonar station. The submarine contacts had stopped moving and now formed a perfect triangle around the still transitioning fleet. "Energy spike detected from all 3 submarine positions," reported the technical chief, his skepticism replaced by professional focus. "Unknown signature, but consistent with electromagnetic pulse preparation." Eliza felt a cold certainty settle over her. "It's blackout. They're going to activate it before our ships can complete the formation change." "Options, Lieutenant?" Takashi asked, his voice calm despite the escalating situation. Eliza's mind raced through scenarios, calculations, and countermeasures. There was only one move that might work, but it would require perfect timing and coordination. Order the Lincoln to launch EMCON countermeasures immediately, targeted at these coordinates. She quickly marked the 3 submarine positions on the tactical display. Then have the destroyers execute an immediate Havoc maneuver. Harlow looked alarmed. Havoc is an emergency collision avoidance protocol, not a tactical response. It would scatter the fleet in random directions. "Exactly," Eliza said. "If blackout activates, it will target ships in formation. Scattered ships operating on individual emergency protocols would be harder to neutralize simultaneously." Takashi didn't hesitate. "Do it. Transmit the orders now." The communications officer began relaying the commands, but before he could finish, the main tactical display flickered and went dark. Secondary systems began showing error messages, and the communications console erupted with alerts. "Lincoln reports complete radar failure," the communications officer called out. "Destroyer Group 3 has lost sonar capabilities. Multiple ships reporting electronic systems disruption." The blackout technology had activated. Just as Eliza had feared, it was targeting the fleet's electronic systems, rendering ships blind and unable to coordinate. But had her warning come in time? "Did the Lincoln receive the EMCON launch order?" she asked urgently. The communications officer checked his logs. "Affirmative. Lincoln acknowledged and reported countermeasure deployment just before we lost clear communications." "And the Havoc maneuver?" "Unclear. We lost contact before confirmation." The operations center fell into controlled chaos as officers worked to re-establish communications and assess the situation. Display screens showed scattered data, some ships completely disappearing from tracking systems, while others appeared intermittently. "How long will this disruption last?" Takashi asked Eliza. "Based on the original blackout specifications, between 15 and 20 minutes, she answered. "But that's assuming they haven't modified the technology since it was scuttled." Harlow approached them, his expression no longer dismissive. "Lieutenant, what's the most likely scenario for the submarine's next move?" Quote. The question surprised her. It was the first time since her demotion that Harlow had directly sought her tactical assessment. "They'll wait for the disruption to create maximum confusion, then target the most valuable asset, the Lincoln. Probably using conventional torpedoes while our countermeasures are focused on electronic warfare." "How would you counter?" Eliza didn't hesitate. "Order all destroyers to deploy torpedo countermeasures in a dispersal pattern around the Lincoln's last known position, then execute random depth charge deployments to force the submarines to maintain distance." Harlow nodded and moved to the communications station, attempting to relay the orders through backup systems. Takashi remained beside Eliza, watching as she continued to adjust the sonar parameters, trying to cut through the electronic interference. "You were right," he said quietly. "About all of it." "We don't know that yet, sir," Eliza replied, focusing on her work. "Not until we see if the fleet survives this attack. Either way, you saw what no one else did." That's what makes a true tactical officer. A flicker on the main display caught their attention. Some of the ship icons were reappearing, moving in erratic patterns that made no sense according to standard formations. They executed havoc, Eliza realized. Look at the movement patterns. Those are individual evasive maneuvers, not coordinated deployment. Slowly, more ships began to reappear on the tactical displays. The communications system crackled with fragmented transmissions as the fleet began to re-establish contact. Lincoln reports partial systems recovery, the communications officer announced. MCON countermeasures successfully deployed. Submarine contacts. Multiple submarine contacts retreating from the area. A cheer went up from several stations. The display continued to clarify, showing the scattered fleet now regrouping as electronic systems came back online. The submarine contacts were indeed moving away at high speed, their coordinated formation broken. Fleet reports no damage, the tactical officer called out. Repeat, no ships damaged. All vessels accounted for. Eliza let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her warning had come in time. The fleet had survived the blackout attack intact. Takashi placed a hand on her shoulder. Well done, Lieutenant. Harlow approached them again, his expression a complex mixture of emotions. Admiral, the Lincoln is requesting instructions. Commander Shaw wants to know if they should pursue the submarine contacts. Negative, Takashi replied. Order the fleet to maintain defensive posture and continue systems recovery. We'll debrief once all ships are at full capability. As Harlow relayed the orders, Eliza began documenting the incident in her notebook, recording the submarine movements, the electronic disruption patterns, and the fleet's response. This data would be crucial for developing countermeasures against future blackout deployments. Lieutenant Chen, Takashi said, drawing her attention from her notes. Prepare a full tactical analysis of this incident for immediate review by Fleet Command. Include your previous observations and how they led to today's warning. Yes, sir. And Eliza, he added more quietly, using her first name, I believe Captain Harlow might want to reconsider that transfer recommendation. As if on cue, Harlow returned to their position. He stood at attention, addressing them both with formal correctness that couldn't quite hide his discomfort. Admiral Takashi, Lieutenant Chen, he began. I've been instructed to inform you that Admiral Williams will be conducting a full review of today's incident. He's requesting your presence at the debriefing. Admiral Williams? Eliza asked, surprised. As commander of the Pacific Fleet, Williams rarely involved himself directly in tactical exercises. The debriefing room felt too small for the assembly of high-ranking officers that had gathered within its walls. Admiral Williams sat at the head of the polished table, his weathered face unreadable as he reviewed the preliminary reports of the incident. On either side of him sat members of his command staff, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. Eliza stood at attention, aware of the weight of scrutiny pressing down on her. Captain Harlow stood to her left, Admiral Takashi to her right. The tableau felt symbolic somehow, caught between the officer who had demoted her and the one who had given her a chance to prove her worth. At ease, Admiral Williams said finally, setting down the report. Let's be clear about what happened today. Our carrier group was targeted by a sophisticated electronic warfare attack, using technology that was supposed to have been destroyed under the Beijing Accord, an attack that might have succeeded if not for Lieutenant Chen's unorthodox analysis and warning. No one spoke. Williams continued, his eyes finding Eliza. Lieutenant, I've reviewed your service record. Distinguished Academy graduate. Top of your class in tactical operations, and by all accounts, a promising officer until the Ryukyu incident. Then this. He tapped the disciplinary file in front of him. Demoted for insubordination and questioning a direct order from your commanding officer. Yes, sir, Eliza replied, keeping her voice neutral. And now, despite that demotion and restriction to strategic assessment duties, you managed to identify and track a threat that our entire intelligence apparatus missed. Williams leaned forward. I find myself in the unusual position of not knowing whether to commend you or court-martial you. A ripple of tension moved through the room. Eliza maintained her composure, though her heart hammered in her chest. "Sir," she began, "my actions were motivated solely by concern for fleet safety based on data analysis that suggested a credible threat. A threat you identified by accessing classified information beyond your current clearance level and conducting unauthorized surveillance activities," interjected Commander Preston, Williams' intelligence officer. "I accessed the Project Blackout files when I held tactical officer clearance," Eliza clarified. "My analysis of submarine movements was conducted using data available to my strategic assessment role." "Creatively interpreted," Preston countered. Admiral Williams held up a hand, silencing further debate. "The outcome is not in question. Your warning prevented what could have been a catastrophic attack on our fleet. What concerns me is the method." He fixed Eliza with a penetrating stare. "You've demonstrated a pattern of disregarding chain of command when your analysis conflicts with orders. That's a dangerous precedent in a military organization." "With respect, Admiral," Takashi interjected, "Lieutenant Chen brought her concerns to me through proper channels. She was acting under my authority during today's incident." "After being placed on restricted duty by her direct superior," Williams noted, glancing at Harlow. The room fell silent again. Eliza knew this moment would define her naval career, perhaps end it entirely. She took a measured breath. "Admiral, may I speak freely?" Williams nodded. "Please do, Lieutenant. The Navy taught me to analyze data objectively and identify threats to our forces. When my analysis revealed a potential danger to the fleet, I had two choices: remain silent to protect my career, or speak up and risk further disciplinary action." She met Williams' gaze directly. "I chose the latter because I believe that's what the uniform demands of us. Not blind obedience, but principled service." Harlow shifted uncomfortably beside her. Commander Preston's expression darkened, but several other officers nodded slightly. "A compelling argument," Williams said after a moment, "but it doesn't address the fundamental issue. Military hierarchy exists for a reason, Lieutenant. If every officer acted on their individual analysis without regard for the chain of command, we'd have chaos, not a navy." "I don't disagree, sir," Eliza replied, "but I believe that chain of command functions best when it values accurate intelligence over comfortable consensus. When officers feel they can't report concerns that contradict established thinking, we create blind spots that our adversaries can exploit." The Admiral studied her thoughtfully. "You sound like your father." Captain Chen made similar arguments about tactical flexibility during the Taiwan Strait crisis. The reference to her father surprised Eliza. "You knew him, sir?" "I served with him on the Roosevelt. He had a similar talent for seeing patterns others missed." Williams closed the disciplinary file. "He also knew when to push against convention and when to work within it. A balance you're still learning, Lieutenant." Williams stood, prompting everyone else to rise as well. "Captain Harlow, Admiral Takashi, I'd like a moment with Lieutenant Chen alone." The other officers filed out, leaving Eliza standing before the Admiral in the suddenly cavernous room. Williams moved to the window, looking out at the harbor where the carrier group was now returning, ships moving into their berths after the interrupted exercise. "You saved those ships today," he said without turning. "Every captain, every sailor on those vessels owes you a debt, but you've put me in a difficult position." "I understand, sir." Williams turned to face her. "Do you?" "Military discipline requires consistency, Lieutenant. If I publicly commend you for disobeying orders, what message does that send to other officers who might decide their judgment supersedes their commanders?" "With respect, sir, I didn't disobey orders today. I worked within the system to raise an alarm about a genuine threat. After being restricted from access to exactly the systems you used to identify that threat." William shook his head. "Don't misunderstand me. I'm grateful for your insight, but there must be consequences for circumventing proper protocols, regardless of the outcome." Eliza felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. This was it, the end of her naval career. Perhaps a dishonorable discharge, or at best, the transfer to San Diego that Harlow had recommended. "What do you suggest as appropriate consequences, Lieutenant?" Williams asked unexpectedly. The question caught her off guard. "Sir? If you were in my position, how would you handle an officer who broke protocol but saved the fleet in doing so?" Eliza considered carefully before answering. "I would acknowledge both the violation and the service, sir. Perhaps a formal reprimand for the protocol breach, coupled with recognition of the contribution." Williams nodded slowly. "A measured response." And what about the officer's future assignment? I would place them where their analytical skills could be utilized within a structure that accommodates unconventional thinking. Eliza paused, then added, "The Navy needs both discipline and innovation, sir. The challenge is creating space for both to coexist." A small smile crossed William's face. "Again, very like your father." He returned to his seat and motioned for Eliza to sit as well. "I've been reviewing the tactical operation logs from today's incident. Your response to the blackout activation was textbook perfect. Except there is no textbook for responding to a weapon system that officially doesn't exist." "I studied the original deployment scenarios, sir." "Yes, so you said. But that doesn't explain how you knew exactly how to counter it. The EM-CON deployment combined with the Havoc maneuver. That wasn't in any blackout protocol I've ever seen." Eliza hesitated, then decided on complete honesty. "After I discovered the submarine search pattern, I developed potential countermeasures based on the technical specifications in the archived files. It was theoretical work, done on my own time. Theoretical work that saved 7 ships and over 5,000 sailors." Williams opened a new file on the table. "I've been authorized to offer you a choice, Lieutenant Chen." He slid 2 documents across the table. Eliza glanced down at them, her heart skipping a beat as she read the headers. "The first is a transfer to naval intelligence, effective immediately. You'd be tasked with analyzing emerging threats and developing countermeasures, similar to what you did with Blackout. The second is reinstatement to your previous rank of commander, with assignment as tactical officer aboard the USS Defiant." Eliza looked up in surprise. "Sir, both positions would utilize your analytical skills. Intelligence would give you freedom to pursue your theories without the constraints of direct command structure. The Defiant would put you back on the command track, but under a captain who appreciates, let's call it, tactical creativity." It was more than she had dared hope for. Either option represented not just salvation for her career, but validation of her approach. "There's a condition," Williams continued. "Whichever path you choose, you will undergo a 3-month mentorship program focused on operational protocol and chain of command integration. Your insights are valuable, Lieutenant, but they must be channeled through proper military structure." "I understand, sir." "Do you? Because this is your last chance, Eliza. Another incident like Ryukyu, another circumvention of command authority, and your career will be over. No intervention from Admiral Takashi, no dramatic fleet-saving insights will change that outcome. Am I clear?" "Perfectly clear, sir." Williams leaned back in his chair. "Then which will it be, intelligence or the Defiant?" Eliza thought of her father, who had believed that true leadership happened on the bridge, not behind a desk. She thought of the last 3 months in strategic assessment, analyzing data that no one acted upon. She thought of the moment today when her warning had reached the fleet just in time, the visceral connection to ships and sailors that had driven her since Academy. "The Defiant, sir. I'd like to return to ship duty." Williams nodded, as if he had expected this answer. "Very well. Report to Commander Davis for your mentorship program tomorrow at 0800. You'll join the Defiant once you've completed the training." "Thank you, Admiral." As Eliza stood to leave, Williams added, "Your father would be proud, Commander Chen. Not just of what you did today, but of your willingness to learn from your mistakes while holding true to your principles. That's the mark of a good officer." The words stayed with Eliza as she left the debriefing room, stepping into the corridor where Admiral Takashi waited. His expression lightened when he saw her face. "Good news, I take it?" "I've been reinstated to commander and assigned to the Defiant after completing a mentorship program," she confirmed, still processing the unexpected turn of events. "The Defiant," Takashi smiled. "Captain Reynolds is a good commander, unconventional in his own way, but effective. You'll learn a lot from him." "You knew about this?" "I may have suggested the assignment when Williams asked for my input." Takashi began walking, gesturing for her to join him. "The Navy needs officers who can think beyond doctrine, Eliza. But those officers need to learn how to work within the system to effect change." They stepped outside into the late afternoon sunlight. The carrier group was visible in the harbor, ships moving with the choreographed precision that belied the chaos they had faced hours earlier. "You saved them," Takashi said quietly. "Remember that feeling. It's why we wear the uniform." "Thank you for believing in me, sir. For giving me the chance today. You earned it. Now go prepare for your new assignment. The real work is just beginning." As Takashi departed, Eliza remained watching the fleet, her future suddenly expansive where hours before it had seemed to be closing in around her. Second chances were rare in naval careers. She would not waste this one. The next 3 months tested Eliza's patience and commitment in ways she hadn't anticipated. Commander Davis, her assigned mentor, was a 30-year veteran with a reputation for rigid adherence to protocol. Their sessions often felt like battles of will, Davis insisting on procedural perfection, Eliza arguing for flexibility in tactical response. "The procedure exists for a reason, Commander," Davis would say, his voice never rising despite his obvious frustration. "It incorporates decades of experience and lessons learned through battle. But when circumstances change, shouldn't our response adapt as well?" Eliza would counter. Over time, a grudging respect developed between them. Davis began to acknowledge the value of Eliza's analytical approach, while she came to appreciate the wisdom embedded in naval tradition and protocol. "The chain of command isn't just about control," Davis told her during their final session. "It's about creating a framework where hundreds of sailors can function as a single organism in crisis. Your insights are valuable, but they must flow through the proper channels to be effective." "I understand that now," Eliza replied, and realized she truly did. The day she reported to the USS Defiant was bright and clear, the kind of perfect Pacific morning that made even veteran sailors pause to appreciate the beauty of their environment. The destroyer sat at berth, her sleek profile cutting a sharp line against the horizon. Newer and smaller than the carrier she had helped save, the Defiant nevertheless represented everything Eliza had worked for: a return to operational command, and a chance to prove herself within the system rather than against it. Captain Michael Reynolds met her on the gangway, a tall man with intelligent eyes and a reputation for running an unconventional but highly effective ship. "Commander Chen," he greeted her with a firm handshake. "Welcome aboard the Defiant. I've been looking forward to meeting the officer who spotted Blackout before our entire intelligence division." "Thank you for the opportunity, sir," Eliza replied, returning the handshake. "I'm eager to join your crew." "You've been the subject of considerable discussion in command circles," Reynolds said as he led her aboard. "Some officers consider you a loose cannon. Others think you're exactly what the modern Navy needs. I'm reserving judgment until I see you in action." "Fair enough, sir." Reynolds stopped on the main deck, turning to face her directly. "Let me be clear about my expectations, Commander. I value initiative and creative thinking. What I don't tolerate is grandstanding or lone wolf heroics. On my ship, we innovate as a team and we follow the chain of command. Is that understood?" "Perfectly, Captain." "Good." His expression softened slightly. "Davis speaks highly of your progress, says you've developed a more nuanced understanding of protocol while maintaining your analytical edge. That's the combination I'm looking for in my tactical officer." The tour of the ship revealed a well-maintained vessel with a crew that clearly respected their captain. Reynolds introduced Eliza to key personnel, including Lieutenant Commander Abigail Wright, the ship's XO, and Lieutenant Marcus Jensen, the operations officer she would be working with closely. "The Defiant deploys in 2 weeks for patrol duty in the South China Sea," Reynolds informed her as they concluded the tour in his ready room. "Between now and then, I expect you to familiarize yourself with our tactical systems, operational protocols, and crew capabilities. Lieutenant Jensen will help you get up to speed." "Yes, sir." "One more thing, Commander." Reynolds fixed her with a steady gaze. "I know about your history of identifying threats others miss. That's an asset I intend to utilize. But on this ship, you bring those concerns to me or Commander Wright first. No exceptions." "Understood, Captain." Dismissed. As Eliza turned to leave, Reynolds added, "And Chen, I'm glad to have you aboard. The Defiant needs officers who see patterns in the chaos." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity as Eliza integrated into the ship's routine and familiarized herself with the Defiant systems. Lieutenant Jensen proved to be an invaluable guide. his detailed knowledge of the ship's capabilities complementing Eliza's broader tactical expertise. "The captain runs a tight ship," Jensen told her during a systems review, "but he's open to new approaches if you can back them with solid analysis. Just don't surprise him in front of the crew." "Lesson learned," Eliza assured him, remembering the Ryukyu incident that had cost her so dearly. Commander Wright was more reserved in her assessment. "Your reputation precedes you, Commander Chen," she said during their first meeting. "Impressive analytical skills, but a problem with authority. I hope the latter has been addressed." "It has, Commander. I understand now that effective tactical response requires both insight and proper command integration." Wright studied her for a moment, then nodded. "We'll see. The South China Sea deployment will test that understanding in real conditions." The day of deployment arrived under threatening skies, a typhoon developing offshore that would skirt their patrol route. As the crew made final preparations, Eliza found herself in the Tactical Operations Center, running diagnostics on the sonar systems with a focus that bordered on obsession. "Everything checks out, Commander," assured Petty Officer Rodriguez, the sonar technician assigned to her team. "System performance is optimal." "Run it again," Eliza instructed. "And this time, extend the frequency range to include the blackout disruption spectrum." Rodriguez looked surprised but complied without question. The additional test revealed no anomalies, but Eliza felt better having checked. The incident with the carrier group had left her hyper-vigilant about electronic warfare vulnerabilities. "All stations report ready for departure," announced Lieutenant Jensen as he entered the tactical center. "Captain wants all department heads on the bridge for cast-off." On the bridge, Captain Reynolds conducted a final review of their mission parameters. The Defiant would patrol a section of the South China Sea where territorial disputes had created tensions between multiple nations. Their orders were to maintain presence, gather intelligence, and ensure freedom of navigation without escalating conflicts. "Questions?" Reynolds asked, looking around at his officers. "Weather report indicates the typhoon will pass north of our patrol route," Commander Wright noted, "but the storm front could affect our aerial surveillance capabilities." "Noted. We'll adjust the drone deployment schedule if necessary." Reynolds turned to Eliza. "Commander Chen, any tactical concerns before we depart?" It was a test, Eliza realized. Reynolds was giving her an opportunity to raise issues while also evaluating her judgment on what merited command attention. "Sir, given recent electronic warfare incidents, I've implemented enhanced monitoring of the blackout disruption spectrum. No anomalies detected, but I recommend we maintain heightened surveillance during patrol." Reynolds nodded approvingly. "Implement the enhanced monitoring, but keep it in background mode unless sensors detect activity. I don't want us chasing ghosts when we have a real mission to complete." "Aye, Captain." The Defiant departed under cloudy skies, the crew functioning with the practiced efficiency of a well-led team. As they cleared the harbor and entered open water, Eliza felt a familiar sense of purpose return. This was where she belonged, on a ship's bridge, contributing her skills to a mission larger than herself. The first 3 days of patrol passed without incident. The Defiant maintained its assigned course, monitoring shipping traffic and conducting routine surveillance operations. The typhoon had veered further north than predicted, sparing them the worst of its effects, but still sending heavy swells that tested the destroyer's stability systems. On the 4th day, as Eliza was reviewing drone surveillance footage in the tactical center, Lieutenant Jensen entered with a troubled expression. "Commander, we're picking up unusual radio transmissions from Grid Sector 7. Encrypted bursts on frequencies typically used by Chinese naval vessels, but they don't match standard communication protocols." Eliza immediately accessed the communications data. The transmissions were indeed unusual, short, highly encrypted bursts that appeared at irregular intervals. A pattern began to form in her mind, reminiscent of coordination signals she'd studied during her tactical training. How long has this been happening? First detected about 6 hours ago. Communications thought it might be weather-related interference, but the pattern is too consistent. Eliza analyzed the transmission locations, plotting them against the ship's patrol route. A concerning picture emerged. The signals formed a rough perimeter around the area the Defiant was scheduled to enter the following day. "This needs to go to the captain," she decided, remembering Reynolds' instructions. "But I want more data first. Can you access our satellite feed for Sector 7? I want to see what's actually there." Jensen worked his console, bringing up the most recent satellite imagery. The area showed heavy cloud cover from the typhoon's outer bands, obscuring direct visual confirmation. Try infrared, Eliza suggested. The infrared view revealed several heat signatures beneath the cloud cover, ships maintaining position in a pattern that immediately raised Eliza's concern. "That's a blockade formation," she said, pointing to the arrangement. 5 vessels positioned to intercept any ship entering that section of international waters. Chinese? Most likely, based on the transmission frequencies. Eliza studied the positioning more carefully, but they're being careful to maintain plausible deniability. No official naval formation, just enough presence to control access to the area. Jensen looked troubled. "That's directly in our patrol route." "Exactly." Eliza gathered the data onto a tablet. "I need to brief the captain immediately. This isn't a routine patrol situation anymore." Following protocol exactly as Davis had drilled into her, Eliza requested a meeting with Captain Reynolds through proper channels. Within 15 minutes, she was presenting her findings in the captain's ready room, with Commander Wright also present. "The pattern is clear, sir," Eliza concluded after showing the transmission data and infrared imagery. "They're establishing control over this section of international waters without declaring it officially. And based on our scheduled patrol route, I believe they're specifically anticipating our arrival." Reynolds studied the evidence thoughtfully. "Analysis, Commander Wright? The data supports Commander Chen's conclusion," Wright acknowledged. "This appears to be a deliberate attempt to challenge our freedom of navigation operation without creating an official incident." "Options?" Reynolds asked. "Standard protocol would be to maintain our course and assert right of passage," Wright said. "Make it clear we don't recognize any restriction on international waters." "That's what they're expecting," Eliza pointed out. "They've positioned their vessels to force a confrontation on their terms." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "You have an alternative suggestion, Commander Chen?" "Yes, sir. Instead of approaching directly, we adjust our patrol route to enter from the eastern quadrant instead. Their formation is oriented to intercept from the south and west. An eastern approach would force them to reposition, revealing their intentional blockade and removing the element of plausible deniability." Wright frowned. "That would deviate from our filed patrol plan." "It would," Eliza agreed. "But it would also give us tactical advantage in what's clearly becoming a test of resolve rather than a routine patrol." Reynolds considered both perspectives, then nodded slowly. "Commander Chen's approach has merit. We'll adjust course for an eastern approach to Sector 7. Commander Wright, prepare a situation report for Fleet Command explaining our deviation from the patrol plan. Cite emerging tactical considerations." "Aye, Captain." "And Commander Chen?" Reynolds added as they prepared to leave. "Good analysis. This is exactly how concerns should be brought forward, through chain of command with supporting evidence." "Thank you, sir." As Eliza returned to the tactical center, she felt a sense of validation that went beyond the captain's approval. She had identified a potential confrontation, analyzed the options, and presented her concerns through proper channels. The system could work when officers on both sides respected its purpose. The Defiant altered course that evening, approaching Sector 7 from the east as Eliza had suggested. By morning, their sensors detected movement among the blockading vessels. Exactly as she had predicted, they were repositioning to intercept the new approach vector, revealing their intentional formation. "They're breaking their disguised positioning," Jensen reported as the tactical display updated. "2 vessels moving to establish blocking positions on our new course." "Now they've shown their hand," Eliza observed. "Their actions confirm deliberate blockade rather than coincidental positioning." Captain Reynolds ordered the ship to general quarters as they closed the distance. The crew moved with practiced efficiency to their battle stations, though everyone understood this was likely to be a test of resolve rather than actual combat. "Maintain course and speed," Reynolds instructed from the command chair. "Commander Chen, continuous tactical assessment. I want to know immediately if their posture changes from blocking to aggressive." "Aye, Captain." The tension on the bridge was palpable as the Defiant continued toward the blockade line. International law and naval tradition were clear. The destroyer had every right to traverse these waters unimpeded. But rights on paper meant little when facing ships determined to assert control. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission," reported the communications officer. They're instructing us to alter course and avoid their territorial waters. Quote, respond with standard freedom of navigation declaration, Reynolds ordered. Remind them that we are in international waters as recognized by maritime law. As the message was transmitted, Eliza noticed a subtle change in the blockading vessel's positions. Captain, they're adjusting formation. 2 ships are creating an apparent gap while the others are positioning to close it once we're committed. A trap, Reynolds concluded. They want to box us in and force either retreat or escalation. Recommend we maintain our approach but adjust course 5 degrees north, Eliza suggested. It will keep us in international waters while avoiding their closure maneuver. Reynolds nodded. Make the adjustment. Let's thread this needle without giving them the confrontation they want. The subtle course change placed the Defiant on a trajectory that would still pierce the blockade line but avoid the trap being set. On the tactical display, Eliza watched the Chinese vessels scramble to reposition again, their coordination now becoming obvious to any observer. They're revealing their hand completely now, Commander Wright noted. Their movements can no longer be explained as coincidental patrol activities. Which was exactly the outcome we needed, Reynolds said with satisfaction. Commander Chen's approach has forced them to either openly declare a blockade or allow us passage. The standoff continued for tense hours as the Defiant maintained its course toward the blockade line. The Chinese vessels adjusted positions repeatedly, trying to re-establish their trap without explicitly challenging international law. We'll cross their line in approximately 20 minutes, Jensen reported. Maintain current course and speed, Reynolds confirmed. All stations remain at general quarters. As the moment of crossing approached, Eliza noticed new data appearing on her tactical display. Captain, we're detecting aircraft approaching from the northwest. 2 fighters, likely launched from the mainland. Aerial intimidation, Reynolds said calmly. Standard escalation tactic. Continue to monitor. The fighters approached rapidly, eventually passing overhead in a low-altitude flyby clearly intended to intimidate. The Defiant maintained course, neither accelerating nor changing direction in response to the provocation. We're crossing the blockade line, announced the navigation officer. On the tactical display, the Chinese vessels made one final adjustment, creating a narrow corridor that would allow the Defiant to pass while saving face. They had blinked first. We did it, Jensen said quietly as the destroyer moved through the blockade. They're letting us through. They're acknowledging they have no legal right to stop us, Eliza corrected. Different thing entirely. Captain Reynolds allowed himself a small smile. Well done, everyone, especially you, Commander Chen. Your tactical assessment changed this from a potential confrontation to a diplomatic victory. We've asserted our rights without giving them the incident they wanted. Thank you, sir, Eliza replied, feeling a deep satisfaction that went beyond personal vindication. This was what she had trained for, using analysis and insight to navigate complex situations, but doing so within the structure of command rather than against it. As the Defiant continued its patrol beyond the blockade line, Reynolds approached Eliza at her station. You're proving Admiral Williams right about you, Commander. Your ability to see patterns and anticipate intentions is exactly what modern naval operations require. I've had good teachers, Eliza acknowledged. Learning to work within the system rather than against it makes my analysis more effective, not less. Reynolds nodded approvingly. That's the lesson some officers never learn. Now let's complete this patrol and show them that international waters remain just that, international. The incident would later be described in naval briefings as a textbook example of asserting navigation rights without escalation. For Eliza, it represented something more personal. Vindication of her approach and proof that questioning conventional thinking could strengthen rather than undermine the chain of command when done through proper channels. The path forward was clearer now. She could be both the analytical officer who saw patterns others missed and the disciplined commander who respected naval tradition. The two weren't mutually exclusive. In fact, together they made her exactly the officer the modern Navy needed. The Defiant had been at sea for 3 weeks when the distress call came in. Eliza was reviewing tactical scenarios with her team when Lieutenant Jensen burst into the operations room, his normally composed demeanor visibly shaken. Commander, emergency transmission from the Lincoln. They're under attack. Eliza rushed to the bridge where Captain Reynolds was already issuing commands. The USS Lincoln, the same carrier she had helped save months ago, was reporting multiple electronic warfare attacks similar to the blackout incident, but with a disturbing new element. Their defensive countermeasures were failing. Situation report, Reynolds demanded as Eliza took her station. Lincoln reports complete defensive system failure, Commander Wright replied, her voice tense. 3 escort vessels have lost propulsion. The carrier is maintaining limited operational capacity, but their combat systems are compromised. Reynolds turned to Eliza. Analysis, Commander? This sounds like an advanced version of the blackout technology, sir, she responded, mind racing through the implications. If they've modified it to specifically target defensive countermeasures, then the entire carrier group is vulnerable, Reynolds finished. What's their position? The tactical display showed the Lincoln's battle group approximately 90 nautical miles northeast of their position, directly in the contested waters they had navigated 2 weeks earlier. Sir, Eliza said, studying the display, this is too coordinated to be coincidental. The Chinese vessels that attempted to block us were likely gathering intelligence on our electronic countermeasure protocols. Reynolds nodded grimly, which means this attack was planned well in advance. The question is why now, and why the Lincoln specifically? The answer came moments later as the communications officer called out, Captain, flash traffic from Fleet Command. Chinese government has announced establishment of an, quote, air defense identification zone covering the entire disputed region. They're claiming the Lincoln violated their sovereign territory. Quote, creating a pretext, Wright muttered. They cripple our flagship, then claim they're defending their territory. Sir, Eliza interjected, Fleet Command will dispatch a response force, but the Lincoln needs immediate assistance. I believe we're dealing with a modified blackout system deployed from the same submarines I tracked months ago. Reynolds studied the tactical situation, weighing options with the calculated precision that had earned him command. If you're right, Commander Chen, then we're the only vessel in range with knowledge of how to counter this technology. Yes, sir, but we'd be facing multiple submarines with upgraded electronic warfare capabilities. Yes, sir. But we'd be facing multiple submarines with upgraded electronic warfare capabilities. Your recommendation? Eliza took a breath, aware that every officer on the bridge was watching her. This moment echoed her previous crisis, a tactical analysis that contradicted conventional response, but now she understood how to navigate it. I recommend immediate deployment to the Lincoln's position, sir, but not along the direct route they'd anticipate. We should approach through the Typhoon boundary to mask our electronic signature. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. The storm's outer bands are generating 30-foot swells, Commander, which is precisely why they won't expect us from that direction, Captain. The blackout technology depends on clear sonar and radar conditions to identify targets. The storm distortion would give us a chance to approach undetected. Commander Wright frowned. That's an extreme risk for a destroyer of our class. So is allowing our carrier group to be neutralized in international waters, Eliza countered. Sir, I believe this is a deliberate test of our response capabilities. If we follow standard protocol, we'll be detected and neutralized before we can assist the Lincoln. Reynolds considered for only moments before nodding. Plot the course through the storm boundary, Commander Chen. All stations prepare for heavy weather operations. We're going to rescue our fleet. As the Defiant altered course toward the storm front, Eliza felt a complex mixture of emotions. Vindication that her assessment was being acted upon, but also the heavy weight of responsibility. Lives would depend on her tactical judgment once again. Sir, she said as Reynolds reviewed the approach vector she'd plotted. Request permission to implement a modified EMCON protocol specifically designed to counter the blackout system. Explain. After the first blackout incident, I developed an oscillating electromagnetic response that might confuse their targeting systems. It's theoretical, but based on the technical specifications I studied. Reynolds studied her for a moment. Was this part of your official duties, Commander? No, sir. I developed it independently. Instead of the reprimand she half expected, Reynolds smiled slightly. Implement your protocol, Commander. Innovation within proper channels is exactly what we need right now. As the destroyer entered the storm's boundary, the sea rose to meet them with punishing force. Waves crashed over the bow, and the ship pitched violently as it fought against the typhoon's outer strength. The crew moved with practiced efficiency despite the conditions, securing equipment and adjusting systems to compensate for the extreme weather. "Maintaining course through storm boundary," reported the helmsman, his knuckles white on the controls. "Conditions at the upper limit of operational parameters, sir." "Steady as she goes," Reynolds ordered, his calm voice a counterpoint to the chaos outside. "Commander Chen, time to intercept?" 47 minutes at current speed, sir. We should emerge from the storm front approximately 12 nautical miles from the Lincoln's position. Lieutenant Jensen approached Eliza's station, his voice low. "Commander, I've implemented your modified EMCON protocol. The system is cycling through electromagnetic frequencies as specified." "Good. Has there been any indication that we've been detected?" "Negative. If there are submarines tracking us, they're not transmitting." Eliza nodded, feeling a momentary confidence. Her plan was working so far. The storm was masking their approach, and the modified electronic countermeasures appeared to be preventing detection. The bridge speakers crackled with a distorted transmission from the Lincoln. "Multiple systems failing. Emergency power. Request immediate assistance. Cannot maintain defensive posture." Reynolds looked to Eliza. "They won't last 47 minutes. Options?" She had been anticipating this question. "Sir, we can accelerate through the storm boundary, transitioning to the clear zone sooner. It would expose us to potential detection, but reduce intercept time to approximately 30 minutes. The ship can't take much more of this pounding anyway," Wright added. "Structural integrity reports are showing stress near tolerance limits." Reynolds made the decision immediately. "Helm, increase speed to flank. Get us through this storm front." The Defiant surged forward, engines straining against the massive waves. The ship shuddered with each impact, metal groaning under stresses it had never been designed to endure. Eliza held tight to her console as a particularly massive wave struck the starboard side, sending equipment and personnel sliding across the tilting deck. "Hull breach reported on Deck 3. Called out the damage control officer. Damage control teams responding." "Can we maintain course and speed?" Reynolds demanded. "Affirmative, Captain. Breach is contained and pumps are operational." Eliza focused on the tactical display, watching as they neared the edge of the storm boundary. Soon they would transition from the relative concealment of the typhoon to open waters and potential detection by the waiting submarines. "Sir," she said, "recommend we launch our tactical drones as soon as we clear the storm. They can deploy in a dispersal pattern to confuse enemy sonar and extend our electronic countermeasure field." "Do it," Reynolds ordered, "and prepare to deploy Mark 54 torpedoes on your command. If we encounter submarines, I want immediate response capability." The minutes stretched with excruciating slowness as the Defiant battled through the last section of the storm boundary. Then, suddenly, they broke through into relatively calm seas, the contrast so stark it felt almost like silence after a thunderclap. "Storm boundary cleared," announced the helmsman. "Sea state returning to moderate. Launch tactical drones," Eliza ordered. Pattern Echo 7. Maximum dispersal. On the external cameras, she watched as the small drones launched from their tubes, skimming just above the water's surface before dispersing in a predetermined pattern around the ship. Each drone emitted electromagnetic signatures designed to mimic a vessel much larger than itself, creating, in effect, a phantom fleet surrounding the Defiant. "Lincoln on visual," called the forward lookout. "Bearing 035, range 11 nautical miles." The main display showed the carrier listing slightly to port, surrounded by its escort vessels in various states of distress. 2 destroyers appeared dead in the water, while a cruiser was moving in an erratic pattern suggesting compromised navigation systems. "No sign of the submarines yet," Jensen reported, "but sonar is detecting unusual acoustic signatures approximately 2,000 yards beneath the Lincoln. Could be the blackout system activating." Eliza studied the tactical display, her mind processing the scenario with practiced efficiency. "Sir, The submarines are likely positioned in a triangular formation similar to the previous blackout deployment. Their systems appear focused on maintaining the electronic disruption of the carrier group, which means they might not have detected us yet," Reynolds concluded. Recommendations? We deploy our countermeasures at maximum range to disrupt their coordination, then launch torpedoes at the acoustic signature locations. Even if we don't score direct hits, the underwater detonations should force them to break formation and disrupt the blackout effect. Reynolds nodded. Make it happen, Commander. Eliza gave the necessary orders, dispatching the tactical drones to positions surrounding the estimated submarine locations. The Defiant continued its approach toward the Lincoln, still undetected thanks to the confusion created by the drone network and the oscillating EMCON protocol. Drones in position, Jensen reported. Ready to activate countermeasure systems on your mark. Lincoln is hailing us, the communications officer announced. They've spotted us on visual, but their communications are severely degraded. Reynolds took the handset. USS Lincoln. This is Captain Reynolds of the Defiant. We are approaching with electronic countermeasures and weapons ready. Stand by for potential underwater detonations in your vicinity. The response was barely audible through the interference. Understood, Defiant. Systems failing. Hurry. Eliza looked to Reynolds. Sir, we are in optimal position. Request permission to activate countermeasures and launch torpedo spread. Execute, Commander. With a series of precise commands, Eliza activated the drone countermeasure system. Immediately, the tactical drones began broadcasting the oscillating electromagnetic signature she had designed, creating a disruptive field that expanded outward from each drone location. Submarine contacts are responding, Jensen reported excitedly. They're breaking formation, sir. Launch torpedoes, Eliza ordered. Target the original acoustic signature locations. The Defiant shuddered slightly as 6 Mark 54 torpedoes launched in rapid succession, their motors engaged as they sped toward the underwater targets. On the tactical display, Eliza watched as the torpedoes tracked toward the locations where the submarines had been positioned before her countermeasures disrupted their formation. Impact in 30 seconds. Jensen counted down. The bridge crew waited in tense silence. Then, the tactical display registered multiple underwater detonations as the torpedoes reached their targets. Direct hit on at least one submarine, Jensen reported. The others appear to have taken proximity damage. Almost immediately, the electronic interference affecting the Lincoln began to diminish. On the main display, lights became visible across the carrier's deck as systems gradually came back online. It's working, Wright said, unable to hide her surprise. The blackout effect is dissipating. Lincoln reports restoration of primary systems, the communications officer confirmed. Their defensive capabilities are coming back online. Reynolds turned to Eliza, open admiration in his expression. Well done, Commander. Your countermeasures worked perfectly. Thank you, sir, but we're not finished yet. Eliza pointed to new contacts appearing on the tactical display. Surface vessels approaching from the northwest, likely the same group that attempted to blockade us previously. They're coming to support the submarine attack, Reynolds concluded. But they didn't expect us to neutralize their electronic warfare advantage so quickly. Lincoln reports their fighter launch capability is restored, the communications officer announced. They're preparing to deploy air support. Reynolds smiled grimly. And suddenly the odds don't look so favorable for our uninvited friends. Within minutes, the Lincoln had launched a squadron of FA-18 Super Hornets that took up positions over the carrier group. The approaching Chinese vessels, seeing that their advantage had disappeared, began to alter course away from the confrontation. They're withdrawing, sir, Wright reported. All hostile surface contacts are returning to their territorial waters. And the submarines? 2 confirmed retreating at high speed, Jensen replied. 1 appears damaged and is moving slowly at depth. No immediate threat. The tension on the bridge gradually subsided as the immediate crisis passed. The Lincoln's systems were fully restored, and the escort vessels were beginning to regain operational capability as the blackout effect dissipated completely. Captain, the communications officer called out, Admiral Williams is hailing from the Lincoln. Priority channel. Reynolds gestured for the transmission to be put through to the main speakers. Admiral Williams' voice came through clearly, his tone combining professional composure with unmistakable gratitude. "Captain Reynolds, on behalf of the Lincoln and her escort group, I extend my profound thanks for your timely intervention. Your tactical approach was unconventional, but extraordinarily effective." "Thank you, Admiral, but the credit belongs to my tactical officer, Commander Chen. Her analysis of the blackout technology and development of specific countermeasures made our response possible." There was a brief pause before Williams responded. "Commander Chen, I might have known. It seems you have a talent for saving fleet assets from this particular threat." "Just doing my duty, Admiral," Eliza replied formally, though she couldn't completely suppress a smile. "Your duty just saved over 6,000 sailors and a $12 billion carrier, Commander. I'd say that merits more than standard acknowledgement." Williams' voice took on a more official tone. "Captain Reynolds, once the situation is fully stabilized, I'd like you and Commander Chen to come aboard the Lincoln for debriefing." "Understood, Admiral. We'll transfer once conditions permit." As the communication ended, Reynolds turned to Eliza. "It appears you've impressed Admiral Williams twice now with your tactical insights." "That's not an easy feat." "I was just applying the lessons I've learned, sir, both about blackout technology and about working within command structure." Reynolds nodded approvingly. "The right combination, as today's outcome demonstrates. Prepare your tactical analysis for the debriefing. I want Williams to understand exactly how your countermeasures functioned." 6 hours later, Eliza found herself in the Admiral's conference room aboard the USS Lincoln, presenting her analysis of the blackout technology and the countermeasures she had developed. Admiral Williams, Captain Reynolds, and the Lincoln's command staff listened intently as she explained the oscillating electromagnetic response that had disrupted the enemy submarine's coordination. The key insight, she concluded, was recognizing that blackout doesn't simply jam our systems. It creates a coordinated wave effect that progressively disables electronic capabilities. By introducing a counterwave at shifting frequencies, we essentially created destructive interference that neutralized its effectiveness. Williams studied the technical diagram she had prepared. "And you developed this countermeasure on your own initiative after the first blackout incident?" Quote, "Yes, Admiral. After my reinstatement, I continued theoretical work on potential defenses against electronic warfare threats, with Captain Reynolds' knowledge and approval." "Within proper channels," Reynolds added pointedly. The main tactical display illuminated with a complex simulation showing a carrier group under attack from 6 different electronic warfare systems deployed in overlapping patterns. It represented the most sophisticated threat scenario they had yet devised, deliberately designed to be nearly impossible to counter with existing technology. The task force officers gathered around the display, watching intently as the simulation unfolded. Protocol Echo activated, its adaptive algorithms responding to the electronic attacks with precisely calibrated countermeasures. For several tense moments, the outcome hung in balance as the system fought against the overwhelming assault. Then, gradually, the carrier group's systems began to stabilize. The countermeasures were working, establishing protective electromagnetic fields around each vessel that disrupted the incoming attacks. "Simulation complete," announced the tactical systems officer. Protocol Echo achieved 87% effectiveness against multiple simultaneous blackout variants. Primary systems protected, secondary systems experienced minimal disruption. A cheer went up from the assembled officers. 87% effectiveness against what was essentially a worst-case scenario represented a remarkable achievement, especially compared to the total system failure the Lincoln had experienced 6 months earlier. "Outstanding work, everyone," Eliza said, genuine pride in her voice. "Especially you, Lieutenant Rodriguez. Your adaptive response algorithm was the key to handling the overlapping attack patterns." Rodriguez, a brilliant young officer who had transferred from naval intelligence specifically to join the task force, nodded in acknowledgement. "Thank you, Captain, but the real test will be how it performs in field conditions." "Which is precisely why Admiral Williams has authorized our upcoming deployment," Eliza replied. "Next week we begin a Pacific-wide training mission, implementing Protocol Echo across the entire 7th Fleet." The announcement generated excited murmurs among the team. The upcoming deployment represented the culmination of months of intensive work and validation of their approach to electronic warfare defense. Captain Reynolds entered the CIC, returning from a briefing with Fleet Command. "I see the simulation was successful," he observed, noting the celebratory atmosphere. 87%, Captain, Eliza confirmed. Protocol Echo is ready for fleet implementation. Reynolds nodded approvingly. Perfect timing. I've just received our final deployment orders. We'll be conducting training operations with every major vessel in the 7th Fleet over the next 3 months, starting with the Lincoln Battle Group next week. The symmetry wasn't lost on Eliza, returning to the very carrier she had saved twice, now bringing a comprehensive solution to the threat that had nearly crippled it. There's more, Reynolds continued. Admiral Williams has authorized the release of our countermeasure protocols to selected Allied navies as part of a new cooperative defense initiative. This news surprised the assembled officers. Naval technology transfers, especially cutting-edge electronic warfare systems, were typically restricted even among close allies. Which nations will be included? Asked Commander Wright, who had transferred with Eliza from the Defiant's original crew to serve as the task force's Strategic Operations Director. Japan, Australia, South Korea, and Singapore initially, Reynolds replied. Captain Chen will personally brief their naval command staffs during our deployment. Eliza absorbed this new dimension of their mission with thoughtful consideration. Sharing the countermeasure technology represented a significant policy shift and a powerful statement about the seriousness with which Fleet Command viewed the electronic warfare threat. Special Project Alpha was the highest priority designation in the Navy's research hierarchy, typically reserved for nuclear deterrence programs and other critical national security initiatives. The assignment of this status to her task force underscored the gravity of the threat Blackout Prime represented. Thank you, Admiral. We'll begin redesign immediately. Eliza paused, then added, There's something else you should know. The targeting methodology in these schematics bears striking similarity to theoretical work published by the Marconi Institute 3 years ago. If Blackout's developers are adapting civilian research, they may have access to other concepts we've overlooked. Williams nodded thoughtfully. Williams is balancing operational security against preparation time. Too many people knowing the accelerated timeline increases the risk of leaks. Takashi met her gaze directly. I'm telling you because your task force is our best hope of developing effective countermeasures in time. You need to know exactly what we're facing. I appreciate your candor, Admiral. We'll adjust our development schedule accordingly. Takashi nodded. One last thing. The Defiant's deployment has been modified. Instead of the full 3-month Pacific Circuit, you'll conduct abbreviated training with the Lincoln Group, then return to the Naval Research Facility at Point Loma for accelerated development work. Back aboard the Defiant, Eliza assembled her senior team for an emergency briefing. The CIC was secured, all recording systems disabled, as she shared the classified intelligence about Blackout Prime and the compressed development timeline. 3 months, Jensen repeated, the concern evident in his voice. That's barely enough time to design a theoretical countermeasure, let alone implement it. Which is exactly why we're going to take an unconventional approach, Eliza replied. She activated the tactical display, showing a conceptual diagram she had developed during her return from Fleet Headquarters. Instead of trying to counter Blackout Prime directly, we're going to create a preemptive defense system that activates before it can establish its targeting lock. The team studied her concept with growing interest. Rather than reacting to Blackout Prime's electronic attack, her approach would create a protective electromagnetic envelope around naval vessels that would prevent the initial system penetration that all electronic warfare required. It's like a vaccine instead of a treatment, observed Lieutenant Rodriguez, preventing infection rather than fighting it after it occurs. Exactly, Eliza confirmed. And we're going to call it Firewall. Do it, Eliza decided. Commander Wright, coordinate with the Roosevelt Group to establish a defensive perimeter using firewall-equipped vessels around those still awaiting upgrade. Lieutenant Rodriguez, implement the modified protocol Echo as a delaying tactic. As the team dispersed to execute their assignments, Captain Reynolds joined Eliza at the tactical display. You've come a long way from questioning orders during the Ryukyu incident, he observed. Now you're giving them with the same confidence you once challenged them. The principle remains the same, Eliza replied, identifying patterns others miss and taking action to protect our forces. The difference is understanding how to work within command structure to implement those insights effectively. Reynolds nodded. A lesson learned through experience rather than instruction. That's what makes you an exceptional officer, Captain Chen. Not just your analytical brilliance, but your growth as a leader. 29 hours later, as the final vessel in the 7th Fleet completed its firewall implementation, intelligence confirmed that Blackout Prime systems had entered standby status. The activation window had arrived, but the fleet was now fully protected by Eliza's revolutionary networked defense. 5 tense days passed with no attack. Then, on the 6th day, sensors detected the distinctive electromagnetic signature of multiple Blackout Prime systems, activating simultaneously across the fleet's operational area. "Blackout Prime activation confirmed," reported the tactical officer. Multiple sources coordinated deployment. On the main display, Eliza watched as Firewall responded exactly as designed. The network defense system detected the incoming electronic attack, predicted its targeting patterns, and established protective electromagnetic envelopes around each vessel before Blackout Prime could establish effective locks. Firewall functioning at 98.7% effectiveness, Jensen announced. All vessels maintaining full operational capability. A collective sigh of relief passed through the command center. Months of intensive development, weeks of accelerated implementation, and days of anxious waiting had culminated in this moment, the fleet standing strong against what should have been a crippling electronic warfare attack. "Send to all vessels," Eliza ordered. "Maintain firewall protocols and standard operations. Do not acknowledge or respond to the attack in any way." The strategy was deliberate. By continuing normal operations without visible reaction, they would conceal the effectiveness of Firewall from those deploying Blackout Prime. The enemy would be left uncertain whether their systems had malfunctioned or been countered, delaying potential modifications to overcome the defense. Admiral Williams' voice came through on the command channel. "Captain Chen, preliminary reports indicate complete protection across the fleet. Blackout Prime has failed to disable a single system on any vessel. Congratulations to you and your task force on this extraordinary achievement." "Thank you, Admiral. The networked defense concept has proven even more effective than our simulations predicted, which is why I've authorized immediate implementation across all U.S. naval forces worldwide," Williams replied. "Your firewall protocol is about to become standard doctrine throughout the Navy." As the communication ended, Eliza looked around at her team, the brilliant, dedicated officers who had helped transform her initial concept into a fleet-saving reality. From Lieutenant Rodriguez's mathematical breakthrough to Jensen's implementation expertise, each had contributed crucial elements to their collective success. "This is your victory," she told them, "not just because you helped develop Firewall, but because you embraced an entirely new approach to naval electronic warfare, one that required us to think beyond individual vessels to fleet-wide coordinated defense." That evening, standing alone on the Defiance observation deck, Eliza watched as the sun set over the vast Pacific. 6 months earlier, she had stood in a similar spot as a demoted lieutenant, watching ships she wasn't allowed to command disappear over the horizon. Now she commanded not just a ship, but a task force that had revolutionized naval warfare doctrine and saved the fleet from a potentially devastating attack. The journey from questioning orders to giving them had been arduous and humbling. She had learned that her analytical insights, however brilliant, required the structure of command to become truly effective. Innovation without implementation remained merely theoretical, and implementation required working within the system rather than against it. Captain Reynolds joined her at the railing. "Thinking about how far you've come." "Thinking about how much I still have to learn," Eliza replied honestly. "Blackout Prime won't be the last electronic threat we face. Our adversaries will adapt, develop new approaches, seek new vulnerabilities. And you'll be ready for them," Reynolds said with confidence. "Not because you're smarter than everyone else, though you often are, but because you've learned to combine that intelligence with respect for command structure and proper channels." Eliza nodded, understanding the truth in his words. Her father had taught her that the ocean didn't care about rank. It only respected those who understood its patterns. But what experience had taught her was equally valuable, that understanding patterns was only the beginning. Translating that understanding into effective action required both the courage to question when necessary and the wisdom to work within the system to implement change. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Eliza felt a profound sense of purpose. She had found her place, not as a lone voice challenging authority, but as a leader who could channel unconventional thinking through proper command structure to protect the fleet and serve the nation. They had grounded her for questioning orders, but her disobedience had saved the fleet. And in the process, she had discovered that the greatest impact came not from standing alone, but from transforming the system from within, bringing others along on the journey toward innovation and excellence. The Navy needed both discipline and creativity, tradition and innovation. Captain Eliza Chen had learned to embody that perfect balance, and in doing so had changed naval warfare forever. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.